Welcome to episode 66 of the Mental Dietitian Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Lynch-potter. Happy Wednesday. Happy whatever day you're listening to this podcast, and welcome back. Today's episode is titled, Are You Giving or Are You Taking? Are you giving or are you taking? And in this podcast episode, I'm going to talk about caregiving or caretaking. And it's something that when I talk about it, I still am working on it. I'm still working through it. And it's something that as soon as I heard the concept, when you hear the words caretaking or caregiving, in a nutshell, caretaking is giving care to somebody, but there's something that you're gaining from it. So caretaking is like a codependency kind of thing where, for example, let's go through it real quick. Caretaking it drains your energy. These are some characteristics of caretaking. You think it's your responsibility to make people feel better. Causes stress, frustration, and resentment towards the people that you care about. You end up attracting needy people. You end up attracting people into your life that think that they need to be looked after, or that maybe think there's something wrong with them. So perfect. It's perfect for you to step in there and take care of them. Don't trust others' abilities to look after themselves. That's a big one. I used to really struggle with that, where I would not allow people to go through their own process or to feel discomfort when that's exactly what the universe or what life or God, whatever you believe, that's exactly what was put in their path for a reason. And I would try to carry other people's stuff for them, which is not my job. Don't have time for self-care as they think that it's selfish. You give with strings attached. They are a few things I wrote down for the characteristics of a caretaker. You are taking, you are not caring from a place which is healthy. And it ends up causing you a lot of damage, causing you a lot of stress. Perfect example of this is a lot of parents, unfortunately. They care about their kids so much, but they're not going to the gym. They're not looking after themselves. They're not getting quality sleep. They are not looking after their marriage with their husband or their wife. They end up putting on weight. They end up drinking a little bit more. And then when their kids leave home, all of a sudden they're like, what the fuck? Where did I go? Where did I go? I've seen it so many times. I saw it a lot when I was a personal trainer for 5 years, a lot. Most of my clients when I was a personal trainer were women between the age of 40 and 60 who were parents, who were mothers, an amazing job, not taking anything away from them. And sometimes you do need to put other people first. But a lot of these women's were going through divorce, or they were extremely unhappy. They didn't feel sexy. They didn't love themselves. They didn't love the way that they looked. And they came to the gym because they were like, I want to do something for myself. It's been 20 years since I've done something for myself. In my opinion, that's a perfect example of caretaking. Caregiving, on the other hand, gives you energy. It doesn't cause anxiety. It doesn't cause stress. You think that people can look after themselves and you're just there to support them. If somebody's going through a hard time, you won't be like, oh, what can I do to make you feel better? You'll be like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And how can I support you? It gives you, like I said, it gives you energy. It supports people, but it doesn't enable them. It doesn't continue the cycle of them being weak. It decreases anxiety and stress. You end up attracting healthy people, not unhealthy people. You practice self-care because it's your responsibility to yourself. And you give freely without any strings attached. It's it's so interesting that concept of caretaking versus caregiving. And even you could probably just cut the episode short right now and just ponder that and sit with that and be like, where in my life, in my relationship, am I doing it with my employees if I'm a business owner? Am I doing it with my spouse? Am I doing it with my friendships? Am I doing it with my coworkers? Am I doing it with my family? Like, where am I caretaking right now? Because if you can make that shift, and I was doing some research on this subject, obviously, before I did this episode, it's like a continuum. A lot of people start at this kind of caretaking kind of arc. Let's picture an arc here. There's a caretaking, and then eventually you slowly can detach from that and become a caregiver where you're just giving. It's fun, it's great. There's a famous quote, I think it's by Gandhi. I hope I don't misquote it, but the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Now, if you hear that and you're like, oh my God, that sounds exhausting, that might be an indicator that your current perspective on that is a caretaker perspective, where when you're in service of others, it's draining, it causes anxiety, stress, depression. It doesn't fill you with goodness. It doesn't make you feel good. That's a perfect example of that. Maybe you're being a caretaker right now, and that this is an invitation. This podcast is an invitation to look at that and to study it. And all I researched was just caregiving versus caretaking psychology. It was talking about how it's a real thing in codependency, in codependent relationships, where they become this cycle. And I've had it in my relationship. I've had it in relationships with lots of people, because I used to, and I still battle with it, I used to get validation from people saying, hey, what you did really helped me. Thank you for being there for me, which is great. That's nice. But where it gets really unhealthy is when that cycle perpetuates and that person that you are caring for or helping or whatever it is continues coming back to you with the same shit. It's like this cycle that happens for, I've had friendships like this. I've actually cut friends out of my life because that's what it was. It's like I was their emotional dump where they felt they could come and do that. And I would always give them good advice. And I would always, hey man, you can do it. It's all good. And eventually I was like, what am I doing? I'm just caretaking for this guy. Like, what am I doing here? This is not healthy. The amount of responsibility that I have taken on for somebody else's life, when that's not my life at all. It's not my job to save or to heal or whatever it is, whatever word you want to use. That's their own job. That's their own job of whatever they think they need to do. And all I can do is support them and help them, but it's not my job to carry their shit. A lot of people walk around with backpacks on their back, and they've got their own rocks in there. They've got their own burdens. They've got their own things they're worried about. What I did for some reason, and nobody told me to, it was just, I don't know where it came from, is that hey man, like, you got some rocks in there, you got some burdens, you got some worries. I'll be your friend. Just pop them in my backpack. Oh, really, man? Thanks, man. My backpack feels a little bit lighter. Thank you so much for doing that. No worries. I do it with lots of people in my life. I do it with my mom, and I do it with my dad, and I would take on all this stuff. They didn't know that I was doing this. Nobody told me to do it. I just thought that that's what being a good human being was about. Don't wish for a lighter load, wish for stronger shoulders so you can carry more. Well, thanks to a lot of deep inner work on myself, I've been able to let a lot of that go. And when I do sense I'm doing that in my life, I can notice it now. And I'm like, hey, man, like, that's not your job. And I really implore you, listening to this episode, this isn't going to be a super long one, but I just wanted to hit you hard and fast with this subject so you can take an inventory of your life and be like, hey, where am I being a caretaker versus being a caregiver? like even my mum and I have spoke about it before. And I know she listens to this podcast. So, hey, mum. There was a point where I wasn't making a lot of money at work, and we had this like caretaker caregiver relationship where she would send me money. I was in Canada and I was in my early 20s and I wasn't making much money at work. And in my head, I was like, well, if I have a bad month at this job, my mum's got my back. So she'll send me money. Do you know what that did at my job? I stopped putting in effort. I became weak. Took my foot off the gas. And it's also the reason why you see a lot of kids that come from massive amounts of wealth. They are very weak in their mindset and their character, because if you get given everything to you, then you become weak and you don't develop character. You don't go through the adversity to develop a strong sense of self. And I noticed that within myself. And she cut that, and it was great. I'm so grateful for that. And that was probably 7-8 years ago. And it was just, that was something with my mom. And it's like maybe you have something going on with one of your parents. If one of your parents still pays your phone bill and you're 38 years old, or helps pay for your rent, or does anything like that, or pays for bills or anything like that consistently, that right there is an enabling caretaking loop, which is draining for the person that's doing it, and it's enabling the person that's receiving that. And nobody really benefits from those relationships. Now, am I talking about if your mom or dad maybe helps you in a really sticky situation? No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about these energetic connections that you may have with an ex-girlfriend or an ex-boyfriend or a friend, or you're just like, all these things that you can take inventory in your life and be like, hey, like, maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe that's not a good thing here. So that's all I really have to say. It's going to be a short one. I've told you some vulnerable stuff about myself. I always try to do that on every podcast, so to make it seem like I'm not talking from a place of, oh, I've conquered this. I am healed. I am all knowing, because I'm not. And even most of the podcast episodes I record, I feel uncomfortable writing about the subject. And that's how I know it's real. That's how I know it's authentic, because I'm like, man, like, who the fuck are you to talk about this? You still battle with this sometimes. It's like, yes, but I've also come so far. So I can give some perspective on it because I've battled with it and because I've seen it. So all you really need to ask yourself is, where am I being a caretaker? And where can I evolve so I can become a caregiver and start giving from a healthy place, knowing your own boundaries, looking after yourself, realizing that if your cup is empty, how can you pour into other people's life? Love you guys. Talk to you soon. Hope this one helped, and I'll see you next week.